As the final rays of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, I stood before the sagging iron gates of the long-abandoned doll factory, breath curling in the frigid evening air. No signs warned me away. In fact, all signs had long since faded to faintly visible scratches and chips of old paint. The looming architecture gave the impression of a mausoleum for forgotten crafts, a place where echoes of life's devotion once filled the corridors, now replaced by the hush of deathly stillness. I had heard whispered tales that this factory had been shuttered decades ago under circumstances no one dared recount in full. Yet here I was, drawn by the rumors of a final batch. Dolls rumored to have something beyond simple, handcrafted artistry. Stepping inside, I felt the stale, suffocating air envelop me like a shroud. My flashlight cast a weak, trembling glow on a maze of dismantled conveyor belts, crates, and dust-laden shelves. The factory's main hall stretched out with a forlorn majesty. The windows high above shattered. Jagged remnants of glass jutted from the frames, allowing chilly night winds to sweep in, carrying a phantom chorus of clattering metal. A small sign that read, "Quality Control. Swap the doll factory's curse. When toys turn vengefully," pendant, half fallen from its rusted chain. Its silent sway appeared sorrowful, as though the building itself warned me to go back, to not search deeper into its sorrowful past. Determined, I moved deeper into the factory, traversing corridors overshadowed by ancient machines and toppled mannequins once used for measuring doll apparel. In the distance, water dripped from a leaky pipe, its rhythmic echo strangely hypnotic. My mind drifted to the stories I had heard, of how the factory's owner, a master toy maker named Horatio Felbron, had grown obsessed with perfecting his creations. The rumor was that in his desperation, he resorted to occult rituals. There were hushed references to a strange figure who visited after midnight, a robed individual who taught Horatio words of power. Supposedly, these dark incantations would breathe life into the dolls, making them unparalleled marvels. Turning a corner, I ventured into a hallway lined with derelict offices. The stale odor of paper and ink pricked my nostrils. Papers lay strewn across the floor, victim to time and vermin. My flashlight illuminated scraps of final orders, supply lists, and hastily scrawled letters of complaint. One document, half-ton from water damage, spoke of aberrant anomalies in the latest batch, mentioning inexplicable movements and unsettling stares. A single phrase was underlined multiple times. "They see me." Anxiety coiled in my stomach. Still, I couldn't bring myself to abandon my search. If anything, the words on the page only piqued my curiosity more. The hallway ended in a rusting, oversized steel door, locked by a chain and a padlock. Something told me this area was significant. After a few moments of searching, I discovered a ring of keys left in a desk drawer. By some stroke of luck, or perhaps misfortune, one of these keys clicked open the lock on the door. With a slow push, I forced the door to yield, its hinges squealing in protest. A wave of cold, almost predatory wind greeted me. Behind the threshold lay a large chamber that appeared to have been the final assembly area. Distant corners vanished into darkness. At the center of the factory floor stood rows of tables, each littered with half-finished dolls or parts waiting to be assembled. Arms, legs, torsos, and heads lay in neat semblances of order, as though the workers had simply stepped away for lunch and never returned. A disturbing presence seemed to permeate the air. My flashlight caught something glinting, and I approached a table where a single porcelain doll's eyes gazed up at me. Even lacking hair or clothing, it exuded an unnerving aura. Its glassy eyes seemed more than mere ornaments. I felt as though it recognized me. Checking my imagination seemed out of the question. This place had the power to twist even the most rational mind. Still, I found myself gently picking up the doll's head. Its weight felt unnatural, more substantial than any porcelain I'd encountered. A moment later, I heard a hiss of wind. The faint jingling of chains followed. Startled, I spun around, yet the chamber was silent. Only my own heart, thudding away in my chest, reminded me I was still alive. Venturing further, I passed rows of shelves that held no ordinary dolls. These figures seemed to radiate a malevolence, with each face contorted into a near-human expression. Some wore twisted grins, while others bore sorrowful pouts rimmed with painted tears. The contrast of these glum or grotesque features, paired with the childlike innocence of rosy cheeks, was deeply unsettling. A wave of foreboding coursed through me. I remembered the rumor that Horatio had poured all he had into the final batch, weaving forbidden words into their construction. The dolls were said to be alive, in the sense that they had an ensorcelled consciousness. But from the state of the factory, I guessed that granting consciousness brought disaster. The sound of a muffled scuffle echoed from behind a cluster of crates. My blood ran cold. I stood motionless, letting my light drift over the wooden containers, expecting an animal or perhaps a trick of my own imagination. Then I heard it again, a subtle scraping, as though something small was moving ever so slightly. Mustering courage, I moved closer. The crates were marked with the words, "Final Delivery," the letters scrawled in thick black paint. An ancient forklift blocked direct access to them, so I stepped around its corroded metal frame. Behind it, hidden from casual view, lay an open crate brimming with doll heads. They were jostling ever so slightly. I froze, uncertain whether I was hallucinating. Then one of the heads tipped on its side and rolled off the crate, landing face up at my feet. Its eyes blinked. My knees nearly gave out. Resisting an urge to sprint for the exit, I tried instead to rationalize what I saw. Perhaps the building's uneven floors caused it to roll. Perhaps the reflective surface made it look as though the doll blinked. But as I stooped down, approaching with trembling hands, I witnessed for certain the minute parting of its eyelids. Those glassy orbs were not lifeless. They were staring directly at me. A faint sound, almost like a child's laugh, muffled in cloth, emanated from somewhere nearby. Panic suffused my thoughts. How could these lifeless pieces be moving, summoning what felt like artificially cultivated bravery? I returned the doll head to the crate and backed away. A deep, shuddery breath let me restrain my rising hysteria. After a pause, I pressed on, telling myself I needed to see the truth. The darkness swallowed my steps as I moved beyond the broader assembly area. I entered a narrower corridor that appeared to lead to Horatio's personal crafting station. The pungent smell of old varnish and rotting wood grew stronger with every step. Finally, I arrived at a heavy door carved with ornamental patterns of ivy and cherubic faces eerily reminiscent of the dolls. Pushing open the door, I entered a workshop that must once have been the heart of creative genius. Dust-piled sketches clung to boards, showcasing designs of elaborately attired dolls. Each had a name in bold calligraphy: Clarabelle, Nightingale, Sybil. Some bore a swirl of sigils or cryptic notations in an archaic script. The floor was littered with broken teacups, old paint tubes, and dislodged doll limbs scattered among half-burned candles, melted to the floor. I realized that these were no simple decorative candles. They were arranged in geometric patterns, as though part of a ritual. A tarnished mirror leaned against one wall, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection. In the flickering beams of my flashlight, I looked like an intruder in this secret realm of forbidden craft. Across the room stood a massive wooden workbench. It was here, presumably, that Horatio brought his creations to ghastly life. A battered diary lay open on the bench, its pages filled with swirling inks that formed odd shapes and letters. Carefully, I lifted the diary, scanning the handwriting. Parts were in English, while others were in some unknown language, closest to runes. My eyes went to a passage in English. They grow restless. I have given them eyes that see beyond the veil, ears that hear the heartbeat of the living. They hunger for more than just existence. My breath caught in my throat. Curiosity warred against dread as I turned another page. I cannot control them. The darkness stirs them, granting them urges I never intended. The final lines of that page were scrawled with violent jerks of the pen. Forgive me. A scraping sound from behind me broke my concentration. My entire body tensed. Slowly, I turned to see a silhouette in the doorway. It was about 2 feet tall, ragged cloth draping off its slender frame, with a porcelain face peering through the gloom. A harsh beam from my flashlight illuminated the doll's features. Painted freckles dotted its cheeks, its lips upturned in a permanent grin. The unsettling part wasn't the grin itself, but that the expression seemed to widen as if in response to my probing gaze. I swallowed hard, edging backward. Then, with a sudden jerk, the doll darted out of sight into the corridor. A pulse of colder air blew into the workshop, extinguishing a half-burned candle on the desk. Feet trembling, I set an unspoken boundary. I was pushing my luck. Yet something in me insisted I had to know how this happened. The diary's final entries revealed Horatio's fear that the spells he wove over his creations had spiraled beyond his mastery. They had a will of their own, a willingness to harm. The local townsfolk, suspecting black magic, had forced the factory to close. Horatio vanished soon after, leaving behind an unfinished consignment of bewitched dolls. But from what I was seeing, that final shipment was far from lifeless. In fact, the dolls seemed to thrive in this place that offered secrecy and shelter for their unholy existence. Steeling myself, I moved from the workshop and wandered back toward the main area. My plan was simple: get out before the darkness swallowed me completely. Then, something caught my attention. Soft footsteps, the patter of tiny feet on concrete. One moment, I glimpsed scuttling shapes, then they vanished into the shadows. Anxiety clawed at my insides. Pictures of these malevolent dolls creeping through the corridors with a cunning intelligence churned through my mind. I feared at any instant they might swarm me. Yet they kept their distance, as if luring me somewhere. Eventually, I found the stairs leading up to what might have been an observation balcony. Ascending carefully, each step creaked alarmingly beneath me. At the top, I discovered a small enclosure with broken windows, overlooking the entire assembly floor. A solitary stool stood near a large, dusty control panel. Possibly foremen once scanned the floor from this vantage, ensuring everything operated smoothly. I peered down, heart drumming. Through the gloom, piles of dolls littered the tables and crates. Eyes glimmered in the darkness. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. My flashlight's beam revealed the horrifying truth. Many of the dolls were in motion. Tiny heads cocked sideways, limbs shifted in irregular spasms, and their gazes locked onto me in unison. They recognized my presence, as though I were an intruder in their territory. A wave of indescribable terror coursed through me. Every instinct screamed to run, but I found myself momentarily paralyzed, enthralled by the impossible spectacle below. Tiny shapes scurried behind columns of crates, their miniature footsteps echoing lightly through the high-ceilinged hall. Then, almost as if commanded by a silent voice, the entire mass of dolls shifted collectively, focusing upon the staircase that led to my vantage point. I had no illusions left about their capabilities. Home alone, I might convince myself it was all an illusion, but here, I felt the unholy energy saturating the air. Sprinting back down the stairs, I nearly slipped on the final step. My flashlight bobbed wildly, illuminating a half-dozen dolls that had gathered near the foot of the staircase. With a childish giggle, they scattered, swift as rats in a sewer. Heart pounding in my ears, I realized they were hurting me, channeling me away from potential exits. I bolted to the side, weaving between toppled shelving units. In the shadows, I found a corridor that likely led outside. I flung myself into it, panting. Far behind, I heard the clack of porcelain limbs, a steady pursuit orchestrated in the dark. Hallway after hallway I ran. Doors jammed or locked hindered my progress. Eventually, I stumbled into a side room that stored shipping crates, tall enough to provide a hiding spot. I wedged myself between two large crates, forcing my ragged breath into silence. The scuttling sounds came again, accompanied by whispered laughter. The door squeaked open, and I saw several small shapes pass by. Fear pressed me to remain absolutely still. One doll paused, its head rotating unnaturally far to peer into the blackness. Its eyes reflected the feeble glow from the hallway beyond. I gripped my flashlight, half expecting it to fling itself at me. After a moment of agonizing tension, it moved on. My heart hammered so violently I feared it would give me away. Waiting until all footsteps faded, I emerged. The corridor stretched ahead, bleak and unwelcoming, so I did the only thing that made sense. I retraced my steps, searching for the original entrance. My flashlight sputtered, its battery waning, as though the very air drained life from anything that lingered. Finally, the dull glare of moonlight shining through shattered windows signaled that I was close. My relief was short-lived. That's when I heard a shrill voice, childlike yet cold with cruel mockery. "Don't leave us," it whined, words dripping malevolence. I spun around to see a cluster of dolls clinging to overhead pipes, their little heads twisting to keep me in sight. Another group blocked the corridor behind me, handfuls of them, each perfectly painted face harboring an uncanny semblance of life. A creeping sense of dread told me they wanted me to stay forever. One doll, seemingly the ringleader, wore a tattered lace dress. Its porcelain face was chipped at the temple, revealing the dull gray material beneath. A set of broken eyelashes hung from one eyelid. Yet its smile was more animated than any child's doll had a right to be. Gestured with one tiny hand, beckoning. My panic soared. Tightening my grip on the flashlight, I decided that my only chance was to run straight through them. If they grabbed me, so be it. I couldn't be caged in this nightmarish place. I lunged forward, aiming my shoulder at a group of the dolls. They tumbled away with an eerie chorus of squeals and clatter. Their porcelain shells could break, but it took more force than I expected. Two latched onto my pant legs, hooking their little fingers into the fabric. I kicked them off, stumbling as I did so. Gritting my teeth, I hurled myself onward, blood lancing through my veins with fear-laced adrenaline. I fled down the corridor into the near dark, scanning desperately for the exit. The thunder of my footsteps thundered in my ears, overshadowing their trailing giggles. Somewhere behind, the patter of rag-draped porcelain legs was unstoppable, but they hadn't caught me yet. Finally saw the rusted gates of the main entrance. Relief flooded me, though I knew I couldn't lower my guard. The gates stood ajar, barely visible in the pale moonlight that streamed through the missing doors. Without hesitation, I dove through. Even as I reached the outer yard, I risked one glance behind me. There, in the half-open doorway, the dolls piled up, a churning mass of demonic cherubs in frilly cloth. Their eyes gleamed in the moonlight. They did not cross the threshold. Instead, they stood, a silent, resentful assembly, as if tied to the building by the eldritch magic that had birthed them. I sprinted away, not stopping until I reached the twisted remains of the front gate. Gasping for breath, heart pounding, I stared back at the monstrous silhouette of the factory. In the cold, distant glow of the moon, the structure looked every bit like a tomb. My mind reeled with what I had seen. Dolls, once envisioned as children's companions, transformed by occult spells into malicious beings. I sensed their anger at being trapped in that derelict place. However, I also sensed a profound danger in letting the world forget them, for they might never truly be contained. Spells that awakened malignant intelligence wouldn't simply yield to time. After I left, I made no formal report to the local authorities. I doubted they would listen, and if they did, they would never believe the full story. Days turned into weeks, and the terror kept me from sleep. I would dream of those glassy eyes flickering open in the night, hear the tiny footsteps creeping through my hallway. More than once I startled awake, convinced a doll was perched at the foot of my bed, only to find nothing. Yet a small voice in me insisted that I was still part of their unholy domain. I worried they might slip beyond the factory walls, find me, and continue their vengeful existence wherever they pleased. After many sleepless nights, I found a measure of resolve. I returned to the library to pore over old records and discovered references to binding spells. One text hinted that Horatio's final conjuration stitched the doll's spirits to the premises itself. They drew power from the disquiet that simmered around the factory's cataclysmic history. To truly sever that power, something more drastic might be required. Ritual cleansing, possibly. Cleansing by fire? A thought took root in my mind. If I set the place ablaze, perhaps I could free the world from their menace, and perhaps free them from the half-life that enslaved them. The notion horrified me, but my fear threatened to corrode my sanity. That same evening I made the journey back, carrying a canister of gasoline in my trunk. The nearer I drew, the heavier the dread that settled around me. Even the moon seemed to shrink behind clouds, unwilling to illuminate the place. My hands trembled as I pushed the gate aside yet again. The factory loomed like a monstrous skeleton. Moving silently, I doused the interior corridors and tables with the fuel. The reek of gasoline mingled with the stagnant odor of the factory. I glimpsed those sinister eyes in the murk beyond my flashlight's range. They watched me, letting me carry out my task. Once I was done, I lightly poured a line leading out the door to a safe distance. My heart pounded, knowing what was coming. I wanted no second guesses, no regrets. With a flick of my lighter, I set the line ablaze. Flames spread hungrily, devouring dust and stale air. The fire keenly raced inside. Almost immediately, shrieks sharper than any toy's squeak rang out. The squeals of porcelain cracking under intense heat, the screech of metal warping, and overhead beams collapsing into the inferno. I stood at the gate, tears stinging my eyes despite the terror that fueled me. The cries were unearthly, as if the dolls themselves lamented the final destruction of their cursed existence. The blaze erupted into the sky, a twisted funeral pyre with black smoke swirling heavenward. Until the roof caved in, I watched. When the streams of fire died to embers, the wind carried away the ashes. The structure's sturdy skeleton eventually collapsed, beams sliding into one another in a screech of tortured metal. This grim satisfaction warred with a lingering sorrow in my chest. Had I freed them, or merely banished them to an unknown fate beyond mortal comprehension? I stood there well after dawn crept over the horizon. Only when the morning sun illuminated a field of smoldering rubble did I finally relent and depart. No pursuit followed me. No porcelain faces glimmered in the haze. In the days that followed, rumors circulated of the old factory's fiery end. Some suspected vandals. Others guessed a vagrant's cooking fire spread out of control. I held my silence. No official inquiry turned up evidence of foul play or supernatural happenings. With time, the story faded from local chatter, but not from my dreams. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that eerie laughter echo in the recesses of my mind. Yet, when I wake, I'm reminded the factory is gone, burned into ash, along with the terrible secret it harbored. I take a pale comfort in that thought, telling myself I did what had to be done. Yes, I purged a nest of malice. Yet a small part of me remains uneasy, haunted by the suspicion that magic such as Horatio summoned might not be so easily confined. Perhaps the dolls' destruction was only partial, and their spirits still roam the night, searching for a new host. My hope is that their fury was consumed in the inferno, leaving behind nothing but broken shards of what had once been. Let their hateful eyes be forever closed, their porcelain limbs scattered as cinders in the wind, never to rise again. And for however long I have left, I'll pray the embers don't smolder beneath the ashes, waiting for the moment they can spark to life once more.